I'm very, very pleased to very shortly open up this roundtable while participants are still joining. So my name is Janine Dahinden, and I'm currently the president of the Swiss Association for Gender Studies. So the association, or the working group of the association who organized this roundtable. And obviously, in fact, we hope that this roundtable could take place on site at the University of Neuchâtel, or we hoped at least that we could do it in a form of hybrid or blended format. But as you know, things changed, unfortunately, and instead of welcoming you within the wall of our university in Neuchâtel, I can welcome you on the server of the University of Neuchâtel. That's where WebEx is going. Anyway, I still will welcome you really warmly to our roundtable, and I'm happy you're joining us in this virtual space. And I will be very brief, but I would like to share two things with you in this very, very short introduction. So first, I would like to share a memory with you I have from quite a while ago. So as you know, the roundtable of this evening, members of different feminist generations will talk about their ideas, their engagements, their projects, but maybe also their struggles. And when the working group of the association came up with the idea of this topic for a roundtable, I was extremely delighted. Also, because it reminded me of a module in a doctoral school in gender study we organized years ago, and I actually do not really remember which year it was, but it must be something like 10 years ago. And we organized a session, and some of the attendees, I think, were also present. And we invited to this session Brigitte Schneck, and there she engaged in a very personal but very political talk with the doctoral students. And I know that many of you knew Brigitte Schneck, as she was really an outstanding Swiss scholar of gender studies, a historian. She directed the Interdisciplinary Center for Gender Studies at the University of Bern, and she tragically and unexpectedly died in spring 2014. And I think she was really an extraordinary person, intellectually speaking, but also as a person, very smart, generous, with a great humor, etc. And in this doctoral school, Brigitte Schneck, she was giving some insights into her own biography. And this narrative, she was linking up with larger structural and political issues. So she talked to these PhD students about how and why she became interested in gender studies, what it meant in the 1980s, where being a student at university when gender studies were not yet taught at all at universities in Switzerland. She also talked about how her feminism and her interest in gender studies was related to her other political activities and many of these things. And it was such an interesting discussion we had with this doctoral student by bringing up this comparison of different times, this biographical snapshot, and she really succeeded to make the doctoral students to think, to reflect, and to engage in also a kind of intergenerational dialogue, I would say. And the roundtable of this evening is similar, but obviously also very different, because we have much more people, we have really different generations, even though we might have to ask the question, what is a generation when it comes to these issues? So I'm quite interested in this also. And I'm really convinced that this will be highly insightful, this roundtable. So I really look forward to this. And the second thing I would like to share are my thanks, because I would like to briefly give my thanks to the many people who made this roundtable possible. So first, many thanks to the working group within the association who organized it, content-wise, and looking for great panelists. And I think they did really a good job. So Dominique, Natalie, Katharina, and also Andrea. And I also would like to thank the people working in the background, like Martin Scher, who is the secretary of the association, who took care of many organizational issues, Fleur and Annelies, who took care of the publicity, and Mattis, who you see here as a host, who is our technical support, who took care of many of the technical aspects which emerge when one organizes an online event, obviously. And this is the first time we do this kind of event. So I'm very happy about his support. And also, I must say, the IT department of our university, and mainly Romain Bessir, really they gave us a hand setting up this WebEx event. And I will say goodbye, and I will also disappear from the screen and continue as a regular participant. And I really hope that you will enjoy this next hour and a half. And I give the floor to, I don't know, the spatial floor, to a virtual floor, to Nathalie Amstutz, who's the vice president of the association and who was also a member of this working group, having organized this roundtable. So thanks a lot, and I will listen carefully and look carefully what you will be talking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine, for the introduction and for hosting the conference now and organizing all this technical stuff to make it possible that we can have the roundtable today. Welcome everybody, also from my side, the guests of the roundtable, but also the participants who are listening and discussing afterwards. I may say some few words as introduction to this topic, share the memories of equality movements and intergeneration dialogue. This roundtable is being held in view of 2021, the 50th anniversary of women's suffrage in Switzerland. You know that there will be many manifestations and events next year. At the same time, it also refers to recent movements like the Black Lives Matter manifestations this year, the women's strike, the second women's strike in 2019, and the Me Too wave in 2018. There are many manifestations and movements being visible now this time. These manifestations create a visibility, a huge visibility to urgent questions of social justice. They formulate manifestos, put the finger on the sore spots of these issues, formulate concrete requirements. They show and form new collectivities and engage debates. When we think about the women's suffrage birthday next year, it is maybe less a happy birthday party of an achievement as the memory of a delay and of fights for the self-evident. Of course, there will be discussions and presentation of various forms of knowledges about how it could come this way and what happened. The achievement of women's suffrage is embedded in a huge network, or even, if I may say so, a carpet of political, civil society work, academic contributions. Further achievements are visible also in this carpet. The Equal Rights Act of 1996, where Patricia Schulz participated, maternity insurance 2005, but as well the gaps are visible in this carpet, the problems defined today, such as the lack of protection against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientations by the Equality Right Act, something that should be completed, or the political rights for people without Swiss passports living in Switzerland for many years, the lack of anti-discrimination laws that prevent racism and discrimination of people with disabilities in the labor market. When we come back to the women's suffrage, one aspect we don't still understand, or I still don't understand, despite the valuable work of historians like Elisabeth, Joris, or Regina Wecker, despite of this fantastic work, is the outrageous lateness in the achievements. The delay seems to be a characteristic of the issues we are working on, although Switzerland is known for its punctuality. Not only concerning women votes' right, but also in terms of the issues that came to the fore during now the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, to mention only the working condition of care professionals, something that is on the agenda for many years. It looks like a delay in the timeline, and it seems inappropriate in view of our society's claim to modernity. However, and we know from the historians, we have to admit that the timeline is not reliable in its dynamics. And that's what we will have as a topic today in our roundtable. We want to challenge the illusion of this timeline and discuss the differences and simultaneities and overlaps of experiences when working on feminist issues. Our guests are from different generations, whatever that means. They work and manifest in feminism, queer feminism, critical race feminism. Our speakers contribute and have contributed to the production of knowledge in these fields. They combine political, academic, and civil society engagement. And we now want to know, or will get insight in what happens to the memories of women who contribute to the development of knowledge on unequal power relations. What are important shared references? What discussions have disappeared? And what needs to be reinvented? Memories are not only stories of the past. It seems that memories are the way how knowledges are organized, how they are displayed, maybe concealed, used, and transformed. Our guest will give us insights in their way to share these memories, to share this production of knowledges, and also the way knowledges are organized within the network or the carpet of their memories. I'm looking forward to this discussion. And before I hand over to Dominique, Dominique Grisard is moderating the roundtable. She is lecturer at the University of Basel, Gender Studies, and is also member of the board of the Association of Gender Studies, Swiss Association of Gender Studies. I would like to thank you very much. Dominique, thank our guests for participating, and also thank Janine and her team for hosting the conference in this special circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for these very inspiring words about delay and timeliness. And thank you for Janine. Also a heartfelt welcome to everyone here present on this virtual forum from my side. But before I start, I would like to say some things about the technical aspects, about the technicalities that aren't technicalities. Participants will notice that only the panelists and the moderator, and also Katharina, which I'll mention in a moment, are visible on screen. There's also the technical support, Mathis Schnell, who's here and will be present, but not in the discussion. I kindly ask the panelists to mute themselves. They already have done so very Very good. But unmute yourself and don't forget, once I ask you to speak. As the moderator, I will address questions directly to each of you. But also, please feel free to raise your hand visibly on screen if you want to add a comment to something another panelist said. We decided also for technical reasons that participants will be muted throughout, but they will be able to participate by writing comments and questions in the Q&A. So you participants are able to use the Q&A function throughout the roundtable, even now. And we will start answering your questions once we open up the roundtable to the official Q&A after about an hour of discussion. Please write your questions to all of us in the Q&A. There is, I guess, a function where you could address someone just specifically, but we ask you to address everyone. So Serena and I will actually see the questions because the people here, the panelists will not look at the Q&A. It's too much for them to do. They will just listen to each other and to me. And Katarina was so kind. She's also a board member of the SSGF. She's so kind to volunteer to group the questions in this first hour, to collect them and group them so that we can jump right in once we open it up to the official Q&A. Yeah, just make sure to send the questions to all of us. And if you would like to, address someone specific, write that you write in the Q&A. This question is particularly to Ella, for example. And you can write your questions in English, German, or French. So I think that'll work too. Let me briefly introduce the panelists, really only briefly, because I really want them to speak themselves about themselves. And this is about experiences and about taking experiences seriously. But still, let me just quickly, mention who these people are that you see on your screen, if you don't know them already. Switzerland's a small place. But I start in alphabetical order with Serena Dankwa, Co-Secretary General of Lesbenorganisation LOS, a social anthropologist, gender and diversity scholar, and a member of Black Women Switzerland Blage, based in Bern. And moving on to Ella Hautier, an activist in the most recent feminist and women's strike, and currently also a prevention worker at Vogay and Profa, and a master's student in Geneva. Then Elisabeth Joris, pioneering historian of women's and gender history in Switzerland, as well as a long-standing activist in the women's movement. How long, we will probably find out. Based in Zurich. And since we're talking about memory and collective memory, and that has also something to do with recognition, I wanted to mention this tidbit that in 2020, basically now, Elisabeth was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Zurich. So someone must have taken note of, her work. But believe it or not, there is another honorary doctorate or doctor present at this roundtable. I mean, how often does that happen? Women. Yeah, so in 2019, the University of Geneva awarded Patricia Schulz an honorary doctorate. And last but not least, let me introduce Patricia, former member of the UN CEDAW committee, that is the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and former director of the Federal Office for Gender Equality. She is currently a senior research associate at the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development and based in Geneva. So welcome, I'm very, very happy that this is happening, even though virtually, but we're here. And so far, it's been working technologically, which, did use some trials and errors, right? Let me first describe how I structured this discussion. I divided it up into 3 blocks, thematic blocks, starting with experiences of injustice and inequality that politicized you. I thus dubbed this first block, the personal is political. And then a second block is devoted to political journeys and rewards. That is, the methods and avenues of critique taken and the challenges and fields of tensions, but also successes encountered. And finally, in the third block, it's about, I want you to really reflect on why it is important to share experiences, share them intergenerationally, and what is at stake also, in maybe rewriting or reshaping the collective Swiss memory, and also why it is important for future actions. Well, without further ado, I just want to jump into this first block. The personal is political. And I want to start with Elisabeth, because I connect the most with the women's movement of the 70s, or the time when this slogan was pertinent. And I want to ask you, what were personal experiences? What were personal experiences of inequality and injustice that paved the way for your own politicization? There's a lot of background noise, but
It's better now?
Now it's better, yeah.
Yes. My experience of inequality, there are a lot of examples. I just take 3 of them. First one, I was born in 1946. I was 20 years old and there was no women's suffrage. And I heard about it since the 1950s because my mother was a women's suffragist, and because Iris von Roten and her husband, well-known feminists, had an office just next to us and were connected to our family. Second, discrimination question. We were 6 children at home, 4 boys, 2 girls. We weren't less intelligent as our brothers, but my sister and me couldn't attend a gymnasium because it was only for boys till the 17th century already, but none for women. So we went both to the commercial school, Handelsschule, École de Commerce, and were secretaries. I was then able to study like my brothers in a roundabout way. I was secretary, and on other ways I attended to the university. And third, I first studied at the university secondary teacher, the school on the first level of secondary school. And there I realized that my male colleague earned 300 francs more than me and this was a lot because I earned 1,300 francs a month and he 1,600 a month for the exactly same position. But I must say it was not so much this experience of discrimination who make me to be an activist. I arrived to Zurich at the university for this first study as a secondary teacher in 1966. And then it began the anti-Vietnam movement. It was the beginning of the left movement at the university. And I was fascinated. I went to all parts of meetings, but I wasn't an activist. I was just participating in my heart. And only in 1970, I went back to give school for 1 year in Valais, and there I engaged, I was co-founder of the left-wing movement, the 1968 movement in Valais. The movement was criticized the church, the authorities, and so on, and a co-founder of the left-wing magazine, Hautier, or the Red Analyze, which exists till now. And so I was engaged here in the left, but I also was criticizing the position of the men in the left. So I had heard about it already in the 69 in Zurich, and then I slowly was engaged and was part of the beginning feminist movement in the 1970s. And I really know that in 1975, I was really a very active activist. But I don't know when it began. It just was influenced me. And I influenced by the left, this movement, and by the feminist movement. I never wanted to have children in the nuclear family. I was really afraid to not to be an activist anymore. So my 2 children were born in a community, and we were 8 adults, and other of them participated in looking after our children. There was my partner and husband too living there. And so the women were all feminists. We were in community. In the evening we left and went to the Frauenzentrum, and so it was no separation between private and public. The personal was political, and it was really, that was absolutely inspiring for me, and it determines my life till now.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's very inspiring to hear this. I mean, shocking, even though we know, but what I'm interested in is how was the reactions in the Valais to your politicization, and how was it different in, a more urban Zurich at the time?
It was easy in Zurich because nobody knew publicly how you lived. But it was difficult as a professional in Zurich. I was teaching. I had to earn my money after being 1 year in Valais as a teacher. I went back to studying history, and it wasn't. I had to earn money. I could teach in school, but it wasn't easy. I had to wait till about I was 55 years old to get a position, a fixed position. Before, I always worked at the same school, but it wasn't a fixed position. It was very difficult. And so it wasn't easy. And in Valais, I was thinking about going back to Valais to be an activist there as a feminist and a left-wing activist, but I would never have to get a position in Valais. And I never had to work. I worked on Valais a lot as a researcher, and I have published a lot, but I never got an Auftrag, and I never could teach there afterwards because it was clear the Joris is a left and the feminist is, they told me, it was the government who told us you never will get a position here. It was easy in Zurich. It was not easy at the school, but it was easy in private.
Well, thank you. I would like now to hear from Patricia, sort of roughly maybe from the same generation, but as was said before, maybe actually generation might be very diverse or heterogeneous. you know, depending of whether we come from more urban or more Catholic or more whatever context, so that many things actually constitute, yeah, sort of what the experiences are. So what politicized you, Patricia?
Thank you. Well, I want to issues. First of all, family table discussions on the Second War. My parents very often spoke of the war, and very often came this fundamental interrogation as to how it was possible that the Germans considered that some human beings were vermin that had to be eliminated, exterminated. And this was for me, the first confrontation. This is the ultimate discrimination of genocide. So this was really something that was very strong in my adolescence. And like Elisabeth, I also have a brother. Well, she has more brothers, but I have one. He's an older brother. He had more freedom and fewer home tasks. And I felt that was unjust. But at the same time, both my parents worked, and most of their female friends also had jobs. So I saw role models of professionally active women. And I must say, my parents were very supportive of both of us. People studying. Then in the last year of school, we had professional orientation. This was quite an amazing experience. It was in the big aula of the school. And the message was of active discouragement of long studies for us because we were girls. And then my last point is, as Elisabeth, when I turned 20 in 1969, I didn't have the right to vote, and I was fascinated by politics, and I was furious. And at the same time, I started my law studies, and there it was one discriminatory law after the next, with no or hardly any criticism of them. So there was really a lot of ignorance and lack of interest and lack of knowledge. And once when our professor of constitutional law was speaking highly about the perfection of Swiss democracy and universal suffrage, I dared suggest that we should speak of the male universal suffrage. I can tell you there was a roar of laughter in the aula. I got the etiquette of a feminist. And I mean, this was enough, or this was enough to become a feminist for the rest of my life. And I took part in the women's liberation movement in Geneva. We had a women's center that was opened every Thursday evening. And so I cooked very regularly there, and it was cooking and talking and discussing the world. It was fascinating. And I started working at 23 as a lawyer trainee, and this was more difficult because this was not in a feminist, well, there were no feminist lawyers practically at the time. So I was in a commercial law firm and had to do with this. So that was what motivated me and kept me going.
And how, I mean, how was that in this commercial law firm, and more broadly, how did you feel as a feminist? Or were you recognized as a feminist there?
Well, my boss, wait, I don't know whether it's my
your connection is sometimes
no,
a bit
I was
off.
cautious.
Yeah.
I was cautious. I wanted to be able to do my ship and go through the exam. I had to like 2 lives. Yeah.
Oh, you're
There's
going
nothing
out,
I can,
but you had 2 lives.
unfortunately.
You had 2 lives,
Okay.
you said.
Yeah. I had, in my activities, I had some success and some failures. And for instance, I was part of organizing the third conference on women and health. And I got in touch with the Swiss Technical Corporation. I was sort of 28, 29, something like that, and got money to organize and accommodate and transport about 350 participants. This was a great experiment. It showed me that it was worth being active, that you could sometimes win. But there were also failures. I was enraged towards ignorance, arrogance, or denial of inequality and discrimination. This really made me mad. But the reactions in general by Swiss society or media, for me, confirmed the need to work with others and to build alliances, and also warned me that this was going to be a very long struggle, so that I'd better prepare for that or else do something different with my life. Well, I stuck with it.
Well, good for you. I think it did pay off somewhat, right? But now move on, and I want to hear from Serena also about her personal experiences that paved the way for your politicization, you know.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. The lights just went off here, so it's a bit dark. A bulb just gave up, so I hope there's still enough light. I think the first experience of inequality that I kind of experienced indirectly was when I was born as a child of a white Swiss woman in Switzerland, but I did not get my mother's nationality. I got a so-called Ausländeraussweis. And on the other hand, women who married a Swiss man could much easier get the Swiss nationality. So that's something that I often realized from my parents, how frustrating that was, their experience as a binational, biracial couple in Switzerland. And also my mother, who was, you know, often trying to protect my father from institutional racism that he experienced as a migrant. So that was definitely an experience that was also discussed at home. Then I was aware of the North-South gap very early because I came to Switzerland when I was 7 and before we were in Ghana. So I had seen basically different worlds and I've seen injustices in both places. But I was also shocked about the ignorance about Africa in Switzerland. So that was one thing that I perhaps more on a representational level, but that also always plays down to material issues. So how people in Switzerland were thinking about Africans in Africa and how that also was a type of violence besides the very real violence of exploitation, of neocolonial exploitation. So I worked in the Drittweltladen when I was 15 years old, and I was trying to understand how is it possible to live in this gap. That's something really that personally that almost tore me apart sometimes, to be so aware of how it is in a different place, but there seemed to be no understanding of it here. And then, well, later on, when I did research in Ghana on female same-sex intimacy, that also sharpened my understanding of sexuality as a resource, of the erotic as power, as Audre Lorde would say, as a knowledge that can also be in face of global injustices, that also can be a form of empowerment. And again, I realized how differently sexuality or sexual identifications are structured in a place that is not Switzerland. And that's something which was also an important experience. And there's a lot of other other things I could talk about, but I think these three are very important, also shaping my own sense of self in terms of how I started also becoming more how I started identifying as Black and as queer. So I think it's a mixture of all these experiences, and also having the opportunity to do gender studies at the University of Basel. When the Center for Gender Studies opened, that really brought my attention to other categories of difference. Or I think that's what made me interested in gender studies, that I realized it's about power, it's about a critique of power that can go further than just politics of suffrage that I did not identify with as much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Serena. So we have education was mentioned as something that has been curtailed or made impossible or made very difficult to pursue, but also something that actually opened up in some ways, you know, for example, gender studies, visions and politicized also. Now, hearing from Ella, you know, what was it like for you? What were your personal experiences that shaped what you became and the political person you became?
So, thank you. I think one central event that influenced my personal politicization was my early coming out, because it happened when I was 16. So I was pretty young, and at that time I had no role model, I had no resources, and I didn't know who to talk to. So I think that was a really important event in my life that shaped my politicization. And also, I think it is, I think, even though I have been confronted to probably sexist discrimination before that, the first one I acknowledged were lesbophobic discrimination. And this is interesting, I think, because my interest for feminism started through LGBTQIA+ issues. So in an intersectional perspective of feminism. And this events led me later to work for Vogue. And this work is very meaningful to me because we're actually doing exactly what I was lacking as a teenager, meaning we're providing resources and support to young LGBTQIA+ people. And that's also interesting because, I mean, my coming out wasn't a long time ago, it was less than 10 years ago. And still nothing was on place at that time for young people in high schools or after or before even. And so this job is also really interesting because now all my relatives and the people around me are really supportive and really caring. But by working for this association, I see many other realities. And I think, so I can see that it's still necessary to bring awareness about those issues. And also this, I think, by digging deeper into queer issues, my interest for feminism also developed itself. And this led me also to enter the collective for the women's strike at the University of Neuchâtel in 2019, and also to start a master's degree in gender studies at the University of Geneva. And also, I think another important politicization factor I can mention here is the Me Too movement, because I think this movement made really visible the issues of sexism, harassment, and sexual violences. And I think it impacted me as many others on the social network and beyond, because it helped people rethink their personal experiences and maybe enlighten it. And also it legitimated a lot of women's speech and experiences, first by maybe naming what they have been through. So yeah, for me, clearly, it was really helpful to find my own voices and to express the issues I'm now fighting for.
Thank you so much, Ella. So I think, we heard now very different, but also actually there's quite a few similarities, I feel. What constitutes movements or certain organizations and how they provide resources, but also, a network. They raise consciousness, they raise awareness and produce knowledge, but they're also safe spaces and they're very moving in the sense of emotionally, people get very attached to these organizations. And I think that's part of it also, getting this voice or feeling to be able to voice and have people sharing similar experiences is important. I want to move on to the block 2 of our discussions of the journey and rewards. Some, actually now, since I'm talking to you, Ella, already, and you already mentioned your involvement in the women's strike, what made you choose this avenue of critique? What was, what struck you as attractive or interesting or fun or important about being part of the women's strike or feminist strike?
Well, I think it was really important to me because it happened in a context where I was shaping my own activism, also for the LGBTQIA+ issues. So it was really important to me to be part of a movement, and I think it was important to be part of the one in the University of Neuchâtel because nothing existed there, and we had to create a whole thing from nothing really, and this was really interesting, and we weren't many, but we were really motivated to do this experience together. And also I think it was important because we were experiencing many sorts of discrimination at the University of Neuchâtel, so it was important to be involved there at that moment for me, as I was also ending my bachelor there. So, and I think for this collective, we had different methods and avenue of critique. For example, we had some institutionalized strategies, like we had appointments with the direction board to address our claims directly to them, and we made and play some information desk about the strike, some roundtables. So yeah, a lot of different things, but we also had other strategies that were interesting because they weren't always authorized by the institution. So we led different action inside the building and out. We used a lot the social network to inform the people, inform our community and beyond. And we wanted to be really transparent on the social media, mostly about what we said to the direction board, for them to be aware of what was happening between the collective and them. And also, of course, we marched during the strike, and we marched before inside the university, and even inside the direction building. And we went to the strike in Neuchâtel, and yeah, I think that was really an emancipatory things to be part of this strike and to create everything, and to, of course, we got inspired by other not institution, but association or collectives. But we had to adapt everything to the place where we were. So it was extremely interesting, and I think we were all working on different level, but still really listening to the contribution and capacities of everyone. So
and How did the University of Neuchâtel, did they embrace your marching through the university?
Well, I think the marching was fine, but we encountered a couple of obstacles, and I think the first one came from the institution itself and from some of its offices. So yeah, we felt some kind of opposition, but then when we went to see the direction board, I think we've been heard, but there are still many things to change here, and yeah.
So I think it's quite striking that quite a few of you have the university as a place where you were politicized or at least acted politically and tried to change. And another striking thing is, which isn't just Ella, but I think it's a bigger thing, is this notion within feminism, but other social movements, of having to start from scratch, that there's nothing before. And yeah, I think it's just something that might be something we can discuss later also in the discussion. How is this that we always feel like, we have to start from new? I mean, sometimes it really is indeed, there's nothing there yet. We need to do it ourselves. But sometimes, I mean, at least nowadays, there's also a long tradition for certain struggles, at least. But moving on to Serena, sort of, what were the methods and avenues that you chose? I mean, there's quite many different ones. But which ones would you like to share with us?
Hearing Ella, I just realized that maybe an experience that came the closest to what she's talking about was the Off-Pride we organized like 10 years ago in Zurich, where Dominique was also involved. And before that, I had never experienced, at least not in Switzerland, kind of a feeling of a group or of building a movement and kind of becoming active together. I always felt quite isolated in my subject position. In Switzerland, when I studied in London, that changed. That I had the first time I realized, okay, there are other Black lesbians, and I kind of found a community, so to speak. I wouldn't say a safe space, but a safer space. So that also politicized me. But so therefore, because I never had such a strong identification, at least not in Switzerland, with a certain category of people or a certain type of activism, I think my activism was quite unintentional. So just by telling my story or being considered Black at a time when I did not consider myself Black, because I knew it depends where I am. In Ghana, I might not be considered Black. So just always being challenged or always being exposed and seen, which was is a difficult experience. At the same time, being exposed, and on the other hand, not being visible as a group, because there is no your group. I think that made me wary of grand identitarian schemes and made me more I think that led to the fact that my activism is perhaps, or has been, more hidden or more personal in the past. For instance, when during my work with the media, with Swiss radio and television, I set myself the goal to talk about music and art from other places without othering them. And that was a huge challenge, because in media you have to you kind of exoticize other cultures. And that was kind of my personal goal, to talk about things, talk about female musicians without reproducing sexist images and so on. And that was a challenge, because the board members were often telling me, oh, you're too complex, this is too complicated, people cannot identify with what you're saying. And thereby also realizing, okay, maybe I'm not the standard audience. If I'm trying to talk to the people I want to address, or that how I would like to be addressed, then I'm in conflict with the seeming majority. So I think that was that is an avenue that I'm still trying today, wherever I am, to make things more complicated. That's, I guess, my type of activism. Making them more intersectional, which is still a huge challenge for everybody, really, because it's a way of thinking that really challenges us. And the only place where I would say today that I went into a space that was more like class, that could be seen as more of a type of a classical activism, is a space that we started in 2013 with a few Black women, queer Black women. That is BLASH, Black Women's Network, that started in Zurich, and is often identified or associated with the Black movement, but we are as much a feminist, if not even a queer feminist movement, than we as a Black movement. And that just also started as a space to get together, to exchange, to even start to realize that our experiences are not single experiences, but that there's a structure to it, that we experience the same types of discriminations and so on. So I guess that's what, also a very fluid space that is changing, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it shows that not all feminist movements are so inclusive and open, and that sometimes other spaces need to be created that fulfill many different roles, not just, necessarily sort of this very traditional notion of politics. And the difficulty, as you said, of thinking of these things intersectionally and, always reducing something to, oh, this is Black, for example, or this is feminist, but not seeing the complexity. Yes, I would like to hear Elisabeth now on your avenues of critique that you have chosen. And
I didn't choose it. I just didn't choose it because there wasn't a choice. I decided to be a feminist historian because of my experience as a historian, as a woman, as part of the feminist movement. I realized there, and as a teacher, I must say, I realized that there was nothing. Women didn't exist in the history, in the Swiss history. The women sources weren't there for teaching. I was always teaching with sources at the gymnasium, at the high school, and there wasn't any material. And for me, it was real to decide to work professionally as a woman, as a mother who wanted to go on in professional work. It wasn't accepted so much. And as a feminist, and I did it for the movement. I did it for the school, the girls especially. I did it not alone. I did it with Heidi Witzig, engaged too in the feminist movement. She was a documentalist, she was a historian with PhD, a documentalist in the Swiss television. It was self-empowerment pure. Heidi had published years before her PhD on the bourgeois of Florence in the Renaissance, nothing to do with the feminist movement, and it was my first book. So we decided we're going to make a book, and we are going to make a book about not only the movement, of the whole life of women, their rights, abortion, education, work, in family, in profession, education, all of them. It was, we worked 6 years on this, and we didn't have a place. I worked in the restaurants. I worked in the hall of the university during my children were at the Krippe, and I worked everywhere, and I worked at home. But I didn't have a place, I didn't have an office. Heidi was more or less the same. We both lived in communities. And so we worked on this, but then there was really a very important change. And this change is due to Regina Wecker and to Brigitte Schneck. Brigitte Schneck organized in 1983. We decided in 1980 to make this, and we were all alone all the time. We were in the archives. We were in the everywhere we could find something, and then we weren't at the university anymore. She a lot of time. I for 3 years haven't been there. And then she heard that there will be a women's a conference of women's history at the University of Bern. We didn't know nobody. And so we always had our meeting in a restaurant near the university bibliothèque. Every week we met there. And then she said, you know, there is a conference, and we just went there and we said we will present our project. And this was the beginning of the very near connection with Regina Wecker and Brigitte Schneck. Brigitte Schneck, she's really essential for what I'm doing now, because you spoke about her and she really was essential. We presented it and there was a lot of women, a few men too, and they said they were very interested. And I began to work with persons of the University of Basel, of Bern, of Geneva, and it brought us a lot of other sources out of the Swiss history of women in Switzerland. And then we had, out of them, beneath them, we began to have to work together with young women who had a group, a tutorat at the University of Zurich. They organized themselves as a part of the feminist movement and for women's history, and they made their Lizenziatsarbeit. Today we will say master work in abortion, in divorce, in single mothers, also, and so on. And they gave us sources too, and they wrote a part of this book that was published 1986. We didn't know that we were doing something what was really expected. It was published 1986 in November, just now, and in the middle of December, 5,000 of books were sold out. It was a bestseller, officially a bestseller, on the list of bestsellers in Switzerland. And sorry, and we could speak everywhere. We could speak at the radio. We had to, I have never been a public person before. We in Wallis as a politician and a left-wing woman, but now everyone, body, all the medias, but also people at university and also at the Cassandra. Cassandra was a University of Women in Jura. There we presented it, and really it changed our life. But we also presented the book. We were asked of really very small groups of women who had 50 or 60 years old, really in traditional women group. We spoke in the first year in 1987 about in more than 50 villages, towns, everywhere. And we connected with all milieus of women. Yes, it was a great experience. We didn't intend it. We made career without wanting to make career. My professor, I finished my master and I was doing my PhD, and I stopped it because I decided to do something who was part of my life as a teacher, feminist, mother, and so on.
Thank you so much for this, well, I have to say, success story, and unintended is it if it were. But now I want to hear from Patricia also about, you know, the quite different methods and avenues to critique that you ended up choosing, deciding on.
Yes, well, I guess you need all sorts of women in the feminist movement. And I've been I became a sort of institutional feminist. I didn't start like that. I'm here by training, as I said, and I believe in institutions. And I think that institutions can bring a lot. I mean, they can bring protection. They can also be very oppressive. So you have to know what you're dealing with when you're dealing with institutions. But for my experiences, I worked many years at the Geneva University Law Faculty, and I was a member of the Geneva University Parliament. And there, with some friends, we created a working group on gender equality. I chaired the working group. It was an official working group. And we managed to get, and this was completely unexpected, the unanimous support of the university parliament, that is professors, the intermediary staff, administrative staff, and the students, to support a project on quotas and gender studies for the University of Geneva. And with after some deep changes, Geneva became the first canton of Switzerland to have such legislation promoting equal opportunities for careers at all levels of the system. And so it was a fascinating experiment. I first tried to get allies with two women's organizations, Classic, the University Women, and the Association for Women's Rights. And then when we got through the process at the university,
We just lost Patricia, unfortunately.
That great then within the federal administration, I'd like to share one or two experiences. One of them, yes, one of them is trying to position the Federal Office for Gender Equality as an office like all others, not like a feminist small association within the federal administration that would be there, but as a competence center that does its job the way that the Federal Office for Justice or the Environment are doing their own activities. And this, I think, was I never regretted taking this direction and trying to the legitimacy of the office and of the issues with which we were dealing, and being seen as competent colleagues within the federal administration, and also seen as competent with different stakeholders outside of the administration. So we worked with, we collaborated closely with trade unions, with employers associations, of course, with the women's organizations. But that I think was an important thing to try to do. And then maybe it will surprise you to know about the tough internal fights that you can have within the federal administration. But we wanted to create a unit on violence against women. We wanted to have more resources to be able to support the cantons, to be able to support the women's shelters, to be able to support research, etc. And it was a 3-year struggle to establish this within the Federal Office for Gender Equality, with small resources, but at least some resources. It was 1.5 jobs and about 200,000 Swiss francs per year. And hearing Elisabeth, I'm very aware of the privilege that I have experienced as director of the Federal Office for Gender Equality. I was doing what I love doing, which is gender equality work, and I was being well paid for it. And I was working with very interesting people within the administration and outside of the administration. And maybe later on, I could also speak of my collaboration with Brigitte Schneck, which was very fruitful for gender studies and the equal opportunities programs of universities.
But did you never feel, I mean, since you talked about this just now, did you never feel sort of in between the women's movement, since you also are part of the women's movement, and then, you know, sort of the state and also international institutions? Was that not something very difficult to somehow feel like you're being just to both sides? Or was it more sort of an opportunity for you?
You have to know what you want, I think. And of course, I got a lot of criticism from all sides. But I had a good team. And I think that I really saw that as an great opportunity, a challenge, of course, but a great opportunity. And again, I mean, starting as a to speak the language of the institution, want to be heard. So this, I started, I was 23, and I remember my first cases in front of court. I was sick. I couldn't sleep for 2 days. I had diarrhea. I felt absolutely horrendous, but I knew that I had to stand up and speak for my client. And if I didn't, this person would not be defended. So this toughens you up a bit. And I did this 4 years, and then I quit and wanted to do something different. But the experience was, I think it was a good training to for what happened later on. And to give you an example, for instance, for the Beijing conference on women in '95, we were very criticized because we didn't have the means to support the women's organizations. They wanted to have half a post and for preparing, but I didn't have that in the federal office, so I couldn't give it since I didn't have it. And so we started on a bit of a rocky road, but then we created a committee for Beijing with about 50 or 60 members, all the women's organizations. We benefited at the federal office immensely from the competence and the commitment of these women, who fed us with all the information and the knowledge that we didn't have. We were going to be a small to Beijing and couldn't cover the whole of the issue. So we really enormously benefited from their competence. But I think it was a two-way, at least maybe it's my illusion, but because we also gave a lot of information, we were loyal, explaining what was happening with the process. And I think that you make choices. For instance, we participated in the negotiations in Beijing only on the issues where we knew that Switzerland aggressive position. Everywhere where we knew a regressive position, we didn't go into negotiations. If we had gone there, we would have had to defend the position of the government. So you make choices, and of course it's sometimes uncomfortable, but my impression was that, I mean, fascinating events in my life, and that we are changing the world. It didn't happen afterwards as well as we hoped, but the text that was negotiated remained a useful and a forward-looking document.
Well, Elisabeth has been wanting to say something to you for some time, so I'll let you speak. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Oh. Yes. I was in Beijing too with Patricia. We know each other since then. And it was fascinating for us, for the NGOs, this working together with Patricia, and there were a few, we were much more women coming from the organization, from the movement, than from the administration. But it was really, it was very, very an empowerment for both of us, for these both. And the other question, I was always, because I come from the autonomous movement of women, I wasn't in the institution, but I must say, I always defend the institution. The movement, a movement is coming up. A movement is a question of pleasure, of question of lust, question of being together, collectivity, and it's never on the same level, because you can't be always on the road, or it's changing. And to having institutions who secure all these issues that the movement formulates is absolutely essential for creating continuity. I'm absolutely happy there is an institution too, and it's the dynamic which is essential. And we in the movement are there always discussing is as an order, like we are not an institution. We don't want to be an institution. We want to be free, and the institution is part of the power of, but I think it's essential to see the dynamics and to the continuity, and also the money which is coming from institution. I later on was working in research, unpaid, but also paid. And quite a lot of this money was coming of the movements, of the institutions of women in the, like you, like Patricia's office. Yeah. Thanks.
A plaidoyer for not looking at these, institutions and the movement as two opposites, but looking at the dynamics and how they can enrich and have, enriched each other. But sticking with this field of tension and moving on maybe to Serena, were there fields of tension in your biography and your political self that were difficult to somehow manage, or did you also see it more as an opportunity, as something that, was was productive for you?
I think tensions are always productive, not just for me. But trying to think of my work that I just started as a co-director of Lesbian Organization Switzerland, I also, what is really fascinating, this organization has been there for over 30 years. And before being with LOS, I've always worked against certain things, like against trafficking in women, against the exploitation of sex workers, or the discriminations and stigmatization of sex work. And now I'm kind of working for a group, which is kind of a new feeling to me, that there is this community that trusts me, that I represent them, and obviously also fight against certain things, but also it's kind of an empowering idea that there is, that me being always very critical of identity politics, I also see the benefits of it, especially since like moving into a more institutional field of politics, that you have that backup, like Elisabeth just said, those people who donate for you to actually do this work and to initiate studies and so on. But of course, every group or every identity is always also excluding others. And I think talking about intersectionality, that's always going to be a challenge and the tension, that somehow we need to think from bottom to top. We need to start to think about those women-loving women who have the least power in society. And on the other hand, these are also the ones who are most invisible. Like thinking of during the time of the lockdown with Corona, there was also some hints that partner violence within female same-sex relationships also went up. And I wonder, where do these women go? Because some of them don't identify as lesbians. They won't call the LGBT helpline. They might not be taken seriously by the police if they say it's a female partner. They might not consult a doctor because they are ashamed, especially also lesbians who are a bit older and maybe had a later coming out. So all these people, I wonder, where are they? Can they actually benefit of the resources that are there, that have been organized by so many active women for so many decades? So I think that's a never-ending challenge, but I also think it's like looking at the Black Lives Matter movement that has become, even that is so intersectional, but also other movements, including the queer movement that is becoming more intersectional in terms of trying to include or to think of different realities. I do think that there has been some progress, although it's still a lot of work, but I can definitely see that, or this year I had some big moments in terms of, okay, it is actually possible that you try to be, as a Black movement, that you try to be more inclusive of people with disabilities, that you try to be more inclusive of trans people. I mean, it's not done, but somehow I'm quite, or more optimistic than I used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm you because this year has been a very weird year, clearly, but as you said, it's you know, obviously there's also some hope and some visibility and consciousness about certain issues like the Black Lives Matter. But what about you, Ella? What about you, and you know, feeling torn between different agendas and organizations, or is that not a theme for you?
Well, of course there are tensions, and I think there are tensions everywhere. And I really agree with Serena with what she just said about intersectionalities and how it is a challenge for every causes to include other diversity in their thoughts to keep fighting. And I think it's a really important thing to do, even though it's really hard. at some point, but it's also something you train, and the more you train, the more you'll be able to think about probably not everyone, but more and more people, and so I think it's also part of the tension that I can see inside the LGBTQIA movements and inside the feminist movements. It's sometimes sad to see that that people who are fighting are always letting other people behind, but we are all fighting for equalities and for ending discriminations, ending violences, and I think we really need to listen to other point of views, which aren't ours, and also to about the institutions. I also think it's a really powerful tool to make things change, but it is useful because it can implement measures and of protection, for example, as Patricia said, but it is also really slow administratively usually. So, and we can see it's about a lot of issues also. And I think even though it's a powerful tool and it can reach a lot of people, institution can also fail us. And we can see it here and elsewhere also with the, examples of backlashes. But even though institutions fail people will always be here fighting for their rights. So I don't know, we need to stick together and connect the struggle and the causes.
Yeah, thank you for your plaidoyer also for politics of coalition, really, right? We should really kind of move on and open up this roundtable, but I do want to hear you speak on this last block 3, sort of also connecting the dots of what we talked about now, about also these experiences that we have shared of different generations, different experiences, different times, different untimeliness or different delays that we mentioned, and how we were able to shape and rewrite history in some sense. So my question maybe to Serena, are we there yet? Or, what still needs to be done, and how vital is raising consciousness about, experienced injustice? You need to unmute.
There's still a lot of people who fall through the cracks, and that's something that really that I find very depressing. So also through the policy cracks, where even the best policy cannot reach people who don't have access to the law, who don't identify with the institutions in a way where they would even seek help. So that is an open question for me. And I hope that through these new solidarities that we have been seeing this year, but that also have a longer history of political education. Black Lives Matter in Switzerland didn't just come from nothing. There has been the Alliance Against Racial Profiling. There have been so many other groups like Collectif Afro-Suisse who have been supportive and who have been doing educational work. So, but I think something that is maybe changing and might help to also think more from the ground or from the most marginalized is kind of a new solidarity that is aware, that is not just about helping others or pitting them or kind of trying to reach out to them, but that we're always only going to be able to reach out to those who are already having some privilege. I think leaving our comfort zones and becoming more aware of our privileges, that is really a step into the direction where we can find better solidarities. So yeah, I think especially when we look at refugees and sans-papiers and people who are really outside of the sphere of the political even, or of the institutional politics, that if you're seeking for asylum, the laws of the Ausländergesetz, you can't even refer to them because you're outside of that scope. And that's things that I find very, very difficult to see how there is different classes emerging in our society, in Switzerland as well, and how that can be overlooked. So yeah, I don't think we're there yet, but as I said, I'm optimistic that things can change by the world also becoming smaller. I mean, it's always been very connected. Patriarchies have been connected, but also feminist movements have been connected for a while now, and they're trying to learn from each other and listening to each other. But I think there's, right now with Corona and all this, I think there is even more of a sense of, hey, this is, nobody can do it on their own. And with the climate crisis, I mean, as horrifying as it all is, there is also that potential of people coming together around issues that we can only solve together. And if we leave behind someone, then it's not gonna happen. So I believe in that if we start from those who are most marginalized, the situation will become better for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So this bottom-up solidarity and connectedness, I guess. What about you, Patricia? What do you think? How can we foster, sort of a collectivity and a solidarity, and also, since we're talking about memory, also, how does intergenerational memory help us in foster maybe a collective movement and solidarity?
Well, first, I think there are classical ways like research and publications, archives, supporting women's organizations, and gender studies. Then I think we need to mainstream gender issues, non-discrimination, and I completely agree with what was said by Ella and by Serena about not getting stuck in one category of women, but dealing with all the various identities that can be found in educational institutions. Only, and I say only like that, gender studies. We need gender perspective in all curricula, and this would be, for me, really something to push for to get things moving. Then I would suggest using the internet, criticizing it and feeding it with history, with memory, and using social media also to enable access to the data, to the immense resources that exist. I mean, I'm overwhelmed in my work in human rights at the international level on gender equality. I mean, there is so much you could read. You can spend your whole life reading. So I would like feminist critiques of the sexist and the bias of artificial intelligence. I think this is a danger that we have to prevent. We need feminist data banks, feminist platforms, and Wikipedia pages. And even more, there are already many more national and issues. And I completely agree with what was said on Leave No One Behind. And for that, I think we need to connect with all the other movements, anti-racism, anti-colonial, environmental, the new economy, universal basic income, all that is being thought. And of course, the whole care thematic. And I'm a great believer in what intersection So I think that would be key to connect with other issues, other groups, other persons. And when I look at for instance, at the climate issue, I see young people, so many young people, young women, young men, and here there's something to do with them. So I guess I'm optimistic in that sense. I'm coming back to the issue of international and national. We spoke about leave no one behind. That's the slogan of the Sustainable Development Goals that have been adopted by all the countries that should be reached by 2030. They will not be reached, but at least at the national level, you can use this as a principle to make things happen. And I've tried in my life to use all that you can take from the international level to argue at the Swiss level that, you know, internationally there's that and that and that, and we in Switzerland, we are very backwards. And all reverse, you can also use what you have that is good in your country to advocate for progress at the international level. And this I tried to do in the CEDAW committee and worked a lot on issues of LGBTI with disabilities, trying to really use what we know to push for progressive legislations, progressive texts, etc. And then there's the implementation, which is a completely different matter.
But one point that I want to mention that you sort of, one big category was knowledge production, you know, also that was one point of intervention. And I want to hear from Elisabeth on this, you know, how important is this shared collective memory or archive in order to change, you know, dominant history? Because clearly Switzerland has this, you know, cultural imaginary as progressive and not as a culture of delay, but of timeliness. You're muted.
It's not primarily a culture of delay. It's a culture of a very strong patriarchy, a traditional patriarchy till now. And we have really to see it in the how all the federalism and all the politics and all the society goes on with exclusion not only of women, exclusion of all what doesn't connect with this view of oneself, and to passing on knowledges by books, on conferences, at the level of the university, but also of the NGOs and different organizations is essential, not to begin always at the level 0. It was a long story that women always begin to speak about without a tradition. And it's because of that we have this image of this Swiss. And it does this still works like this. Women's history, gender history is not part in the public reflection of part of the history. I always say it's still the sidecar. It's still that's what we are doing en plus. But it's we have to see that the reflection of society without inclusion of knowledge of a gender history, of women's history, of knowledges of gender knowledges in all parts of society is not the real reflection of what's happening. And still now, when we are speaking about politics, all the knowledges of gender research is not really entering in these debates. And for me, it's essential for reflection. And for changing society, we have to do reflections, and we have to see it in a long run. And this is because of that is important that we have a sense of history for all, not only for women, of all who are excluded too.
Yeah, thank you, Elisabeth. How about Ella? You know, since you mentioned earlier that you felt like you had to start from scratch, and also how your coming out felt like, you know, there's no one really, there's no one to connect with. How did you end up gaining a sense of history, or gaining a sense of, oh, there are other people? And, you know, how did that help you then also get mobilized? And even now, how does that help you?
Well, that's a big question, but I think I had to educate myself first, actually, because as Elisabeth said, the thing we're talking about now are not taught in school, they're not taught in high school, neither in university. I mean, apart from gender studies, master degrees. Otherwise, even when I was in a sociology master, we didn't. They didn't teach us about feminism, or not a lot, at least. And yeah, so I had to read books. I had to. I don't know. I think I met people also who were great for me and who helped me shape my politicization, and who helped me have a reflexive posture of also. And but I think actually everything went pretty quickly after the Me Too movement. I think after that, yeah, everything happened pretty quickly, and I got involved in different movements, the LGBTQIA movement, also feminist one, and yeah, and the more I learned about it, the more I wanted to learn even more. So yeah, and now it feels like the master degree in gender studies helped me go way faster in this direction. But even without that, I think I would have kept being interested in feminists and other issues. So I would have keep educating myself. And of course, I think also that history is necessary. Knowing your history is necessary to understand what are the struggles now and what still need to be done. And it also helps building solutions, because we can think about what happened before and see what was productive, what was transgressive, what was, I don't know, what worked. And this is really important. But I think also about history, we need to think about who write it, because quite often history was written by people who had some power also in our, I mean, in our big history. So we need also to think about that. And yeah, but it is useful, and also I think it brings hope to know what happened before, because it makes us realize that even if that if people are mobilizing themselves now, they can change things. So that's hopeful.
Thank you, Ella. We're basically, you know, at the end of the time allotted to us for the discussion, and we haven't involved the audience, which is a pity. But I also have been eyeing the Q&A, and I don't see any questions. Are there questions? I mean, this is the moment you can ask these fabulous, interesting women with many asterisks, you know, about anything, but address it to all of us. And I can still choose whether we will answer it. But, you know, maybe the medium is difficult to get an audience involved by also muting you. I mean, the word already is very difficult. Yeah, Serena, you want to say something? Unmute yourself.
Well, if nobody wants to ask a question, I will ask a question to one of these fabulous women here present. I would like to know from Elisabeth, Joris, how you managed to be a mother, live in a collective. I also live in a collective as a mother. at the same time be an activist, do research, and have jobs to make a living with NGOs and in other places? I really want to know, how do you manage to do that?
You have to unmute yourself.
When I am thinking about this, I can understand how I managed it. I must say that, but I just did it. But it was not, it was going together. I was living in community for 6 years in the same, now I'm in a house where we have separate apartments, but we have a community, we had always the children together. And so it's not but it was part, it was going together. I can't, when I'm looking at it, I can't understand, but I have a father of my children who was engaged as much, even not more than me, because he didn't work so much in movements and research like me, but that was essential. But I don't know how I managed it. I did it, yes. And that was a large enrichment of me. And doing, always it gave me something. It was one thing in my life gave the other things. So I went to Beijing, and Beijing I saw CEDA, and then we wrote this book about Black women in Switzerland. And I never thought of writing a book about Black women in Switzerland. That is an example how we doesn't include it if we don't take it in our lives. Integrate what we see and what we experience in our reflection and in our doing in the movement and in the research. It's going together, yes. And friendship was the same as working in the research and working and being in a movement. It's good. It's life.
It really is that emotional part also of movement.
Yes.
It is moving in many ways. There is a question from the audience that is probably best addressed to Ella and Serena. What measures would you suggest to implement at universities for LGBTIQ communities? So what measures do you think, or?
Well, with the collective, we try to implement measures, or at least to talk about measures with the direction board. And it was mostly, I think, about trans people, to facilitate the administrative procedure for them to have their, how do you call it? The name they use in their documents and in their mail address and everywhere without having it changed officially. And I think now it's moving forward with these questions inside the universities. And we had also the question of the toilets, to maybe abolish gender in the toilet for people to be more comfortable to go where they want without it being gendered. So that's some examples. I don't know if you have other, maybe Serena.
I think the curriculum also needs to change to make it more a space where the way knowledge is produced is also so much based on a heteronormative matrix. There's a lack of role models and I'm not saying that it necessarily needs to be role model standing for a certain example for one identity, because there's so many. I mean, we'll have more and more, and that's a good thing. It's evolving to the point where at some point we might not even need them anymore, or we might not need the boxes anymore. But right now we need them to fight injustices. But I think, yeah, the curricula, I'm thinking more of how sexist the curricula still is and racist, that it's not talked about, that the private is political, that the personal is political. That's something that people who are, for instance, who don't have an academic background, who don't have the habitus to just go in there and feel comfortable. I think the way things are taught can also be more or less welcoming to certain groups who are not traditionally being inside the university. This is maybe a very vague answer, but I think we have to look at this bigger picture. I did a study at ZHDK and 2 universities in Geneva. Art School Differences was the name of the study. I was involved in trying to find out what are the inclusion and exclusion mechanisms within higher education, within higher art schools. And that's where we really realized that it's not just, it's the framing, but it's also the topics themselves that can encourage you to stick with the study once you have even entered. I mean, that's the first thing. How do you even enter into a certain subject if you have been busy all your youth dealing with your sexuality or having to hide it and so on? But then once you're there, how can you make people really interested and engaged and see themselves as part of, yes, I can change something, and I'm not just, I'm not just a token, or I'm not just being here because it's nice to have a few queer people, as long as they don't try to change the system.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's interested, go look at this study, Art School Differences. I think it is very interesting and pioneering in some sense, because it tries to really implement an intersectional perspective. I mean, it shows that it's very difficult to do, but I think it's for Switzerland at least very pioneering in that sense. There is one more question that is addressed to all fabulous women, and the question is about coincidence. So not about decisions and choices, but about what role did coincidence play in shaping your politicization? And I quote, from my humble experience, I see that choices I made for certain reasons led to totally new perspectives I couldn't even have imagined. So also how some things are opened up that one, might not have anticipated. Who wants to take a stab at this? Unmute yourself.
For me, I always the first book I decided, but then going on, I decided or choose to do something, but it happened through life. There was coincidence. I spoke about Beijing, where I was meeting very closely CEDA, and then there was this project of publishing a book, and so I connected with younger women of the Black women's movement, a totally new opening to me. I didn't decide to do it, but to be open and work, and then you have coincidences of work, of politicization, of perspective, of view and reflection. That you didn't decide primarily to do, but it happened and you had to do it. So I don't know if this is an answer to this question.
Yeah, no, I think so. Patricia also wanted to add something to this topic, and then there is another question for Patricia after that. Do you want me to say it also? All right. So says a practical question for Patricia, as gender studies are badly institutionalized. What are the legal foundations in Geneva for gender studies? A way to take for the association to support gender studies in Geneva, I presume. From Nathalie Amstutz, the question. A complex question.
Yeah, well, I guess that, I mean, they are mentioned in the law. There's a budget. And I've left the university in end of '93. So you have to go to people who are dealing with the situation now to give you more food for thought. I would be overwhelmed. But what I'd like to say is when I studied, I did the licence in 3 years, and I had one single woman professor during one semester. Now there is a lot of women professors, and some of them are feminists. So they are mainstreaming gender perspectives in their own lectures and all that. So this, I think, is a progressive. Otherwise, I can regret that the financing that we managed to secure at the federal level to support gender studies in cantonal universities has been reduced very much. And this was something that I battled for. This wasn't at all one of the priorities of the office, as a matter of fact. But coming from university, I felt it was my duty. And it was also my joy to work with women from the universities, the two École Polytechnique Fédérale and the Hochschule, the Fachhochschulen, the HES, to maintain the program for equal opportunities. And that's when I worked with Brigitte Schneck, and we strategized for many hours to see how to keep the money for those programs, or not year after year. It's a 4-year period financing. And it was very important to do that. And I regret that this work has not been continued, and the awareness within the Federal Secretariat for Research, etc., is not that much interested. I think I would try and relaunch something at this level. I'm open to discuss if Nathalie wants a discussion. Then I'd like to come back to the first question. Coincidences, chances in life. This project you about the Geneva University. I wrote the project, and after that I was invited in Bern and Zurich and Basel to speak about the Genfer model, the Geneva model of what we were trying to get going. And this led to my being invited to a TV program on the quota initiative at the federal level, but in the background with other lawyers. You may remember that there was at some point a proposal that we should have quotas for the Federal Council, for Parliament, for the Federal Court, etc. And this was instrumental, actually, in complete change of my activities. I was at the university. I had just started on a national, Swiss National Fund project on institutions and gender equality. And suddenly the position of Bern was open because the first director moved to the secretary of the Federal Department of the Interior. And so there was a possibility of being a candidate. And so it was a complete shift. I mean, I had wanted to at last write a thesis, and this project would have enabled this. But I felt, I mean, actually, I have so I think I'm much happier trying to work through institutions to push gender equality and non-discrimination than I would have been writing abstruse stuff. So that's it.
So sometimes coincidences can lead us to actually maybe, I don't know if it's our calling, but at least something. Yeah. Well, the reactions here are Nathalie Amstoß would like to discuss this further with you, okay. Patricia. And I think she's speaking in the name of the Swiss Association for Gender Studies, that this is definitely interesting to think of maybe a new Bundesprogramm. Who knows? Then there's many who wrote in and think that this was a thank you, panelists, for a wonderful and moving discussion. And also other people who are proud that, for example, Elisabeth Joris was honored by, you know, the big university. And of course, the same goes for Patricia. I mean, it is kind of amazing, you know, that these sometimes very, very slow moving, as has been said, institutions do sometimes award recognition to, you know, yeah, certain positions that aren't always so favorably met. So I think we're at the end of this discussion. We have already taken up a lot of room and space. If there's not one very pressing comment or question from the audience or the participants here on the panel, I would, is there one? No? Then I would like to really thank you, panelists, for being such, I don't know, fascinating, inspiring folks here, and that you shared so much from your own experience. And I think it is really important, because only if we take our experiences seriously can we really affect change and, you know, change our collective memory, but also move on and become more aware of injustices and issues of inclusion today. Before I want to really close this roundtable, I want to plug our conference next year. So for people who are still here in the audience, or the people here in the roundtable, you know, and want to think about these issues further, there is much opportunity all throughout next year, but particularly at the conference on in November 26, 27, on women's suffrage and democracy, critique, memory, and visions. That's what we call it. It'll be at the University of Zurich, hopefully, or, you know, if we're still in this moment, we will definitely do it probably online. But let's hope that we can reconvene physically and yeah, create a new movement or institutionalize something. Thank you so much.